Hi there, Spud Whiteman here. Today I'm going to use the classic racing sim GT Legends to combine one of my favorite racetracks with one of the funnest cars I ever owned. That car was a cameo white 1973 Pontiac Trans Am. It had a 455 and a big blue chicken decal on the hood. I bought the car back in 1977, which was my sophomore year in college, and I still think that the 70 to 73 Firebird was one of the most beautiful cars ever made in America. The track is none other than Le Mans. Now, Steve McQueen's film Le Mans absolutely blew me away the first time I saw it, and it remains my favorite racing movie to this day. I'm from Fort Bragg, which is a town on the north coast of California, about 3 hours north of San Francisco. There ain't nothing but curvy two-lane roads that are perfect for sports cars and motorcycles. And if I squinted as I hauled ass past the orchards and vineyards on Highway 128, it was easy enough to pretend that I was bombing through the French countryside. But enough with the introductions already. Let's hit the track. Let me have a sip of coffee and then we'll continue. The car mod I'm using today is a 1971 Trans Am that was lovingly crafted by Team 21 and friends. It's based on Roger Bolliger's 71 Trans Am that he races in historic events across the pond. The real car has an all-aluminum 496 cubic inch motor that was built by Butler Performance up in Lawrenceburg, Tennessee, and it puts out a whopping 730 horsepower on pump gas. Luckily, Team 21 also offers an SCCA Trans Am series model of the car. You may recall that the Trans Am series back in those days had a 5-liter limit, so the motor in this one is a 301 cubic incher that puts out 449 horsepower at 7,000 RPM and redlines at 8,000. This is nitpicking, but the real Pontiac race motor was 303 cubic inches. That 7,000 RPM is problematic though. By 1968, all Pontiac motors had a nodular cast crank, and with the notable exception of the Super Duty 455, they also had cast rods. This really limited the Pontiac engine's performance potential in the real world. You just didn't dare rev a 455 past 5,700 RPM or so, or a 400 past 6,400. Really bad things would happen if you did. I went into the engine file and changed the max RPM to 5,700 to reflect this. I'm comfortable with the horsepower figures given though. I did some modifications to my engine that leads me to believe that the horsepower and torque numbers in the mod's engine file are comparable. I explain all this in fascinating detail at the end of the video. There are charts and graphs and everything, so be sure to stick around. I've actually got a couple of old teammates who've raced in the 24 Hours of Le Mans. Todd Hurdle, who builds the Xfinity motors at Jeremy Clements Racing, and Rick Johnson, who has been at Riley Motorsports for some 3 or 4 years now, and is also sporting a couple of 24-hour Daytona LMP3 class wins in 2021 and 2022, as well as a bunch of victories at other tracks. I may not have raced in the 24 Hours of Le Mans, however, and I don't mean to brag, I have done several races in the prestigious 24 Hours of Lemons with the notorious Meyer brothers, Jeff and Jim. The track layout for Le Mans in this video was 8.476 miles long. The longest lap I've ever done is the 5-mile Thunder Slide up at Thunder Hill Raceway Park. They combine the east and west courses for a fairly technical track with 24 corners. Personally, I didn't much care for it. If you were trying to crack off a really fast lap and screw the pooch in a corner, you had way too long to think about it before you started another lap. But the biggest difference between Thunder Hill and Le Mans is that no one has ever woken up in Willows, California and thought they were in northwestern France. Ain't it cool how, thanks to simming, we can race cars that in real life we'd never get a chance to even sit in on racetracks that we'd never get a chance to actually drive on. You've probably noticed there were no damn chicanes on the Mulsanne Straight. This is the layout of the track that they raced from 1972 to 1978. They added the Porsche curves to slow the cars down some at Maison Blanche. They also added a second chicane leading onto the pit straight, so logically the Ford chicane now became the Ford chicanes. I think Virtua LM did a wonderful job designing this track for GT Legends, and they also offer a 1991 to 1996 layout. Both of these tracks are also available for GTR2, and I know that the 91 to 96 layout is also out there for R Factor 1. I'm not sure about this 72 to 78 layout though. All of Virtua LM's offerings are must-haves for me. I wish my video's visual quality did their work justice. Unfortunately, this was done on an old Optiplex 755 with Windows XP, and although I maxed out the memory, I then turned around and cheaped out by using an old GeForce GE210 video card. I could have stuck a craft single in the PCI slot and gotten about the same results. Anywho, we're fixing to start the time lapse, so I'm going to turn off the music and shut my pie hole. Well, there you have it. The stopwatch shows a 4-minute, 23.5-second lap. Could I have turned a lap that fast at Le Mans if somehow I woke up in 1977 to find that the bird and I had somehow been magically transported to the track? I don't think so. I know I'd have had tears running down my cheeks holding my motor wide open at 5,700 RPM for the 3.7-mile-long trip down the Mulsanne. And I don't think there is any way my motor would have lasted for any length of time at that pace. For one, the Pontiac's oiling system was fine in a straight line, but after some really hard cornering, the original stock lifters would let me know they weren't happy. And although I don't remember them being available in 1977, my car sure could have used an AccuSump. You might have noticed that the top speed down the Mulsanne straight was about 132 miles per hour at 5,700 RPM. That's about where mine topped out, and I think it's another indicator that the power in the car mod ain't too far off mine. My car came out right around the start of all that awful stuff the manufacturers began to do to the motors in order to meet the plethora of the new smog laws our ruling overlords began to pass. Compression ratios plummeted from the 10.5 to 11:1 ratios we saw in motors in the 60s to in between 8 and 8.5 to 1. The stock 455 was 8.21. The easiest way to bump up compression on a Pontiac is to swap out to heads with smaller combustion chambers. I found a set of Ram Air 3 heads, but then realized that the 62cc chambers would bump me up to over 11:1. That wasn't going to fly on the pump gas back then, so it was back to the junkyard where I grabbed a set of heads off a 71-400. They had 96cc chambers that worked out to a much more reasonable 9.1:1. I had a 455 HO cam as well as anti-pump up Ram Air 4 lifters and springs. I also swapped out the distributor points with an Excel BEI breakerless ignition kit and also recurved the advance in the distributor with different weights and springs. It goes without saying that the car also had the obligatory headers. I'm going to pretend that I kept the original Quadrajet, although I did end up swapping it out later for a 650 CFM Holley spread bore in a vain attempt to increase my mileage. Between the Holley and recurving the advance, the car was really crisp off the line, although it did run out of some steam on the top end. The car had a 342 rear gear, which is a tweener gear. It wasn't tall enough to be a highway gear like the 308 offered in some of the birds, nor was it short enough to give you some help in the acceleration department like the 4-1 or 373 that you could get in some of the 71 cars. It was also a 10-bolt, which isn't near as strong as a 12-bolt. Anyway, I took an engine simulation called Desktop Dyno 2000. It's free, by the way, and I'll leave a link in the description. The simulated dyno isn't super sophisticated, but I figured it was good enough for this video, and like I said, it's free. I plugged all my information into it, and here are the results. As you can see from the graph, all four curves seem to intersect right around 5,500 RPM. As far as the torque curves for the two motors, they're fairly close from about 4,000 to 6,000. The 455 is a bit fatter in that range, which is logical. Peak torque for the 301 is 448 foot-pounds at 4,000 RPM, whereas it's 456 foot-pounds at 4,500 RPM for the 455. As far as the horsepower, the 455 is at 436, right around 5,500 RPMs, and the 301 is 429 horsepower at that same 5,500 RPMs. Yes, the 301's horsepower curve keeps climbing until it peaks at 450 horse at 7,000 RPM. But remember, I'm limiting the RPMs to 5,700 on account of the 455's cast rods. From what I have read, the 455 Super Duty used the same crank found in the regular 455s, but it was finished with deep rolled fillets, which increased both strength and rigidity. So from looking at these numbers, I'm comfortable to have used the 301's engine file as is, except for limiting the RPM to 5,700. That ought to do it for this video. If you've hung in all the way to the end, then you are my new BFF, as I'm known to ramble on just a bit by those who know and love me. If you'd be willing to do me a kindness, please subscribe to my channel and hit the like button. Now get out of here before I sick the dogs on you.